Welcome to Space Uncensored, the podcast where we demystify space and uncover the untold stories of the industries. I'm your host, Andrea, and I'm super thrilled today to welcome Dr. Emma Gatti, a true force of nature in the space sector. Emma's career is a really big mix of accomplishments, spanning from volcanology, and I need to really ask about it because my younger son wanted to be a volcanologist, and then he gave up on it. Geochemistry, space economics, science communication, and much more, which I could talk about. She's a former editor-in-chief of Spacewatch Global, a leading platform for space trends, and CEO of Funnel, a science communication studio creating visually stunning concept, and a 2023 Karma Fellow recognized for her leadership in fostering international cooperation in space. Emma is also a published author. It's incredible how much stuff she does, and I don't know how she finds the time. And she's a sought-after speaker and moderator at international space conferences, a co-founder of several editorial initiatives, all, of course, linked to science communication. In the past, she co-founded the award-winning digital magazine called Mona Lisa Bites, and she's now in a process of opening a new project, which I hope she will be able to talk to us about. Of course, all focused on space and remote sensing. So guys, just take a deep breath. We are just getting started. Emma, such a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It's a pleasure, likewise.
So before we delve into your impressive space career, let's rewind a little bit. I'm really curious about the whole stuff around volcanoes. So what sparked your initial interest in volcanoes, and what led you actually to pursue your PhD in volcanology at Cambridge, focusing on geochemistry of volcanic ash deposits?
So yes, how I ended up from volcanoes to space is quite a story, really. I know. Now the link is geochemistry, so it's the key connection. So I didn't do a PhD in physical volcanology. I did a PhD in chemical volcanology, which means study rocks, the chemistry of rocks to understand and reconstruct a landscape or a geological process or a natural process. And I ended up in volcanology because I was already doing geochemistry in the lab. It's one of the traditional courses you do when you take a degree in geology or in environmental science. And there was this incredible opportunity that was a kind of a collaboration between my PhD advisors, so between a geological degree and an archaeological group. So there was this very interesting group of archaeologists from Oxford. They were looking at human extinctions in India due to a mega volcanic eruption that happened in Indonesia 75,000 years ago. This volcano is called Toba. It's a beautiful lake, by the way. If you live in Dubai, if you have the chance to go to Indonesia.
I lived in Indonesia, actually.
So 2006, it's a fantastic...
I never been to the lake, though.
So it's a huge caldera. You don't realize it's a volcano because it's so big. So it's filled up with water. But 75,000 years ago, 73,000 also, I should remember since it's my PhD thesis, it was a volcano. And it erupted and it created so much environmental consequences that the archaeologists thought it might have triggered actually an extinction. So they were all looking for traces of this extinction from India, but they needed some geologists and volcanologists helping them to kind of mark down and understand the eruption. And it sounded just a fantastic project. I was like 24, 25, and there was this fieldwork in India, traveling in Indonesia, and I thought, sign me up. Let's do it. So that's how I started to do this kind of volcanological degree. That's how I finished the PhD. And so that's the first part of my life.
Maybe for the people who are just now curious, how is it possible that a volcano erupts in Indonesia? However, you've been looking at India. So how does that work? I think that, it would be really interesting for the audience just to explain.
So that's a correct point. Is if you know the geography of Indonesia and India, you are quite distant, is because this was a super eruption. So we are speaking about volcanoes that are extra in size, like Yellowstone type of volcanoes. So they are not the traditional volcanoes that we're used to. They are mega volcanoes, super volcanoes that they erupt every thousands of years. So they are not the traditional eruption we are used to think. And when they erupt, they can create a huge amount of damage. And we have never assisted, and we never experienced a super eruption in our human history. Let's put it this in history, speaking about our recorded history. So this is why it's very difficult for us to understand. But this eruption was so big that it was able to bring ashes, its remains, its product up to India, and actually they found it up into Lake Malawi in Africa. So this was the extent
That's
of the
incredible.
impact.
That's
Huge.
It's huge because I mean Malawi is in the middle of Africa, so
Exactly.
So you started on that project, and that's how you got into your PhD. And how you know you how does it then work into space? How did you then transformed into the space industry?
So that was, I think, the first big kind of quantum jump in my career, in my life. So I finished my PhD, and I was still kind of oriented towards volcanology or traditional volcanology, and that was 2012, 2013, and those were the years where there was the Obama administration, and Obama really wanted to go to Mars. And they started to send rovers. If you remember, they had Curiosity, which was sending these beautiful pictures of those kind of dry lakes and canyons. So it was clear that Mars geology had something to do with water. And that's where you want to have geologists that can help you to understand how the planet evolved, how it lost its water. So that was the moment in 2012, 2013, that NASA was hiring a lot of natural scientists, geologists, chemists, to help them to understand, to reconstruct the path of Mars, to understand, to study the geology of Mars. So there was the opportunities to actually, as a geologist, as a geochemist, as I was, to go and shift career, shift focus, but use the techniques that I applied for my PhD, my geochemical techniques, to something that was completely different. It was not volcanoes, it was Mars. Right. And I was at the end of so I finished my PhD. And I think it's that kind of moment around 28, 29 years old when you can foresee a change in career or a shift in career. The idea to go to NASA was fantastic. Also because, the postdoc, the home base for Mars studies was JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. So the perspective to go to California was not a bad idea. And I applied. They were looking for scientists, and I applied, and I got it. And so after my PhD from England, I moved to California, and that was it.
So now California, and you have applied your volcanology expertise on this Mars project and researching, obviously, the planet's humidity history at the Propulsion laboratory, as you mentioned, in California. How did that expertise shape your understanding of a planetary science? Because that, I assume, was the first time where you got really introduced from on Earth, of Earth, kind of science and its all components. And how did that then influence your full transition into the space economy?
So this is a very important difference. When you are a terrestrial geologist, you have the possibility to do field work, like I did. You go on the field, you go to see the volcano, you take samples, you map the area. You have a very strong feeling of the landscape, and you have probably decades of history that can help you to build up. Right. When you start to explore another planet, like Mars or the Moon, all this doesn't exist. All the science that we have on those planets is way more recent, is way more limited. It has big gaps because it's a new science. Geology of the Moon is not as easy, is extremely complicated compared to geology of Earth, which is a discipline that has been developed for the past centuries. And you don't have that kind of physical contact. You cannot go and check out if your data are correct. You can make an hypothesis. So it's much more of a lab work. It becomes a laboratory work. It becomes a series of analog works. You try to find samples on Earth that you think they look like the one on Mars, and you make hypotheses and you make assumptions. And fundamentally, you suggest to the engineers which type of tools, which type of analytical tools they should try to build the next time they go to Mars. So it's it's also much longer, because you study now and then you suggest, and then the engineers have to build, and then you get to have the money, you have to have the grants. So it's something that it might span years. So it's a different type of approach to science.
How do you, that's really, thank you for explaining it because I think that's really important. And I mean, one question which comes to my mind is how do you validate the hypothesis? Because I mean, it's incredible as you describe it, you're actually creating hypothesis, finding something which is similar to something you would find on Mars, for example, and then you do your recommendation. So how do you decide in that field that this is, out of your maybe 100 hypotheses, that this is the one which you will go with?
So there are two ways in which premises is still a field. Like planetary geology is not the same of Earth geology because you have way more uncertainties. So starting from the point that you have a broader array of choices that you can pick and a higher chances to make mistakes. Science, so the technology help us to kind of validate our theories in two ways. Either you use remote sensing data, which means satellites orbiting around Mars or around the moon, and those provide you some remote sensing data that can help you to determine or to define your hypothesis, or you hope that they're going to send a rover and the rover is going to sample certain type of rocks and you're going to compare the chemistry and the geochemistry of your work, of your theoretical framework with the one that you found there. So these are the two main. Or you always hope that it's going to be some Mars or lunar materials coming on Earth and then you compare with the meteorites.
Before I ask you about, how about your when return to Milan, I think that it's really fascinating. And I imagine, any kind of sample which comes from out of and from orbit and different planet, there must be millions of not millions, but thousands of scientists who wants to get their hands on it because of different type of experiments, right? So how is that kind of, if samples are brought to Earth, is there like a waiting list? Is there how do you get hands onto some samples which obviously would dramatically maybe change your theory and help you to evolve what you're already working on? Because there are so many different scientists which want to prove their other theories, maybe not necessarily connected to what you're doing.
So there are two ways. One way, if we speak about meteorites, of course, have been going through the atmosphere, they've been falling, they are somehow contaminated. These are not so difficult to obtain for scientific work. Another thing, if we're speaking about lunar samples, for example. Obviously,
Right.
Mars, we don't have Mars samples because Mars sample return mission hasn't occurred yet, but we do have lunar samples from the Apollo missions. And when the United States came back with the samples, these samples were made actually available for the international scientific community, which is fantastic because so everyone could study them. And they depending from the type of sampling and work you're doing, they get delivered to your lab, etc. And we speak about very tiny fragments sometimes, because that's the nature of the beast. But yeah, you can apply and you can have them. And those samples have been the international community has been able to analyze lunar samples for quite a while now, thanks to the Apollo mission. And now we will have at some point also the Chinese samples coming from the other side, from the dark side of the moon. We don't know yet when they will be available, probably maybe next year, something like this. They want to analyze them first, but the hope is that also those samples will be available for the international scientific community.
That's really interesting. Let me fast forward a little bit to 2018,
yeah, of course.
when you came back to Milan and you made quite a significant career shift from a space economy into a policy, right? So from volcanoes to space, then to policy. What prompted this transition and what are the biggest challenging you moving from purely scientific field, which you've been in different forms of shape before, into a more business-oriented world of space analysis and policy?
So I think there is one important clarification here, Andrea. So I didn't move into policy, I moved into journalism, which is, is still awesome. Communication in a sort of way, but it's slightly different. So I didn't move into the policy-making direction. I moved into communication and journalism, which is different. The approach, the language you use, the goal that you have is different. So that was the second quantum jump of my life. That was a bit later in life, was around when I was 34, 35. So when I finished my path at NASA, I also went to Caltech. So I stayed 5 years in total in the United States. And the transition to the space dimension was done in a sort of way. And that's where I decided to change career. And that was more of a radical change, because while when I moved from Volcanoes to space was still within the academic environment. So I changed topic, but I was still more or less doing the same work. When I left academia after many years, and I decided to become, I don't know how to define myself. I struggle to define myself a journalist because I don't have a journalistic background. I didn't study journalism at school, so I don't want to sell myself as something that I'm not. But so when I decided to transition to space communication, space analyst from a more journalistic point of view, and this is important because if you're in academia or if you're a scientist, you have more of a quantitative approach to your research, which means that you have a lab, you look at the data, and you publish in peer-reviewed papers, in peer representation. When you move into journalism, you step out of the field of the expertise. You're not the one producing the data anymore. You produce the story. So you analyze different data, you talk to the experts, you don't become the producer of knowledge anymore, but you put together different versions and you come out with the story or with what you believe is the most coherent version of the truth to allow the public to understand what's going on behind the closed doors of the expertise. So it's a kind of radical shift in how you perceive yourself and how you perceive your professional work. So it's a different approach,
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, so when it was like 2018, so I decided to move to step out of academia because I think in general, academia research is something that you feel to do it, you should do it. It has its own rules, it has its own structure, it has its own career path, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. I always try to shift to writing. It's always been a bit difficult because, as you can notice, I'm not a native English speaker. So especially when I was still an undergraduate or a graduate student, I was not having the enough skills ability to actually write in English and speak in English and being able to produce what was in my brain and translate it on paper with enough fluency to make it professionally acceptable. So I had to wait for a bit. And then when I was 34, 35, that's where I decided to say, okay, let's do it. It's time to do it. I always wanted to do it. I wanted to get out of academia. Again, it's a great environment if you are that kind of person. I was missing a bit, I think, the contact with reality. The world was moving at a much faster pace than academia does. And I felt the need to be more part of the kind of like fast-pacing world rather than the reflective world of academia. But this is me, though. This is not a critique to academia, Andrea. It's just my personal way of how I perceive it. And so that's 2018. I moved back to Italy without a job. Great idea. Great plan, Emma. But because communication is complex, it means everything and it means nothing. You ask a person that does communication for a corporate and they will tell you that they do communication. And then you ask to a journalist and they will tell you, I do communication. Even a teacher is a communicator somehow, is an educator. So
right.
I didn't really know how to shape up my expertise to turn it into something that would be gratifying, fulfilling jobs. And also because it was the moment of YouTubers, bloggers, and everybody was saying that the way to become a good science communicator or outreach was to become a YouTuber or whatever. And I tried and it was a disaster because it's really not my job. I'm not that kind of person. I was feeling that kind of like educational approach in which I explain you the ABC of how the stars forms. It was really not my field. And plus I was not really, I've never been a big fan of social media or exposing myself to build up my own profile as a person rather than putting at the center what I was analyzing. So I tried, it was a disaster. I wish everyone that does the career good luck, but it was not me. So that was 2018, 2019. And I started to write for some local magazine in Italian, did some science articles, something very simple, and I was still sticking to space. And then I was getting a bit bored because how many times you can explain how the moon formed, how Mars formed? I was just, feeling, okay, if I want to do science communication, I need to do it the way I feel is engaging and I feel I can give a contribution. So that was 2020, and I apologize if I'm not getting the numbers right. but I started to work on a project that was about perseverance. And Perseverance was a new rover on Mars. And I started to just notice the geopolitical dimension. There were so many new countries exploring Mars. And I thought, okay, why the UAE is on Mars, for example? That was kind of a radical shifting from the previous era of space in which there was just the US and Russia studying Mars, studying space. So I started to think, okay, let me see if there is something interesting here. Maybe the dynamic of space are changing. And there was something, that was the introduction to space economies, geopolitics. So I started to write about this. And then Spacewatch Global arrived because it was an interesting reality, one of a unique European platform discussing about space, not from a scientific dimension, but from a geopolitical dimension and economical dimension. So I started to work for them. So that's on parallel, if you want to have the full vision, so I give you everything. I was also interested in understanding how to create more efficient ways to communicate science to the public. It's always been something that passionate interests me and worries me, how scientists communicate, what they do to the general public and how the general public perceive us, and how science can get into the general discourse, the political discourse, the social discourse. Is a complex topic. I think there are still a lot of problems on this, but I was interested in understanding, okay, can I elaborate? Can I find a way, a method that can allow a easier or better communication? So that's what I founded Mona Lisa Bytes. There was some grant that I applied for and I won it from my previous university. And the idea was quite simple. So, okay, so we have a digital platform. We bring in the scientists, we bring in artists, because art is much more immediate. Let's see if we can open up a journalistic and editorial project in which artists and scientists collaborate together to create some articles, maybe. Just let's experiment. So it was a kind of a sandbox. But allow me to understand also some editorial dynamics. How does it work to open a magazine? What does it need? Which type of problems? Which type of limitation? What does it work? What doesn't work? So I also started to develop a bit of more of a business approach to media and to, in particular, to magazine and digital platform. So when Spacewatch Global arrived, on one side I had the expertise skills. I was writing articles as an expert, and on the other side I matured enough understanding of the media world, of the editorial world, to at least be able to advise the strategies of content. What can we apply? What is interesting? What the audience want? How can we do a podcast? How can we do videos? How we can use social media? And then when Spacewatch Global asked me, okay, do you want to be the editor-in-chief? I say, yes, I think I can do it because I have both vision. I have the space vision, but I also have the editorial vision.
That's really interesting. And, I want to stay there a little bit because as a former editor-in-chief of Spacewatch Global, you decided you've been deciding the stories you will cover, right? And what was your approach to making complex space topic accessible to wider audience? Because I found it's, many people, when you say we're talking about space, it's too complex. It's not for me. I don't understand it. So what are some of the biggest challenges you face in the space communication?
So that's a good point. That's a very good point. So when it came, Spacewatch Global was still what I will define a B2B instrument. So it means that it was not speaking directly to the general public. He was still speaking to people that more or less interested. But your question still stands. What are the main difficulties I'm noticing? Well, generally speaking, we in science and in space, let's speak about space. We still have a bizarre obsession to discuss with the others about us with the lens that we find more appropriate for us, which is technology. So we still have a very technologically focused, technologically driven approach to any type of communication.
Explain it a little bit more, maybe. What do you mean?
We discuss about climate change starting from the sensors that we use to monitor climate change. without understanding that the public doesn't care about the sensors. That it is a technological detail for them. Exactly like we don't care about how our phone is being made. You just want the phone to work. So often we don't understand that. We don't understand how the public perceives us because we have a very strong angle in which we perceive ourselves. We start from the technology, and therefore we speak about the technology. We always start from the technology without understanding that, in good or bad, the technology. If you want to crack the line, and if you want to discuss about what is relevant for the public, you need to speak their language, not our language. And their language is not a technological language, which means that if you want to discuss about the key role of space in climate change monitoring, you cannot start from the satellites, because people don't care about satellites. They care about understanding if the city is going to sink, if they're not going to have a coast beach to go to, if the crops are going to be flooded, is there going to be famine. So you have to tackle human-centric, empathic topics, and then use sciences as a supporting actor. And this is something that we don't like, because we don't want to be the supporting actors.
Yes, it's fascinating that you mentioned, as you used the satellite data and satellite imagery as example. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and we talk about how the prices of real estate will change in the future the moment you can obviously measure the sound pollution and the air pollution. And for all of that, you need satellite data. But again, if the conversation would have started to say, we can use satellite imagery for that, people already switch off and they don't even want to continue. But the moment you can say, where you buy the property in the future will not be only determined by the place, but maybe in the same compound, you might have 20% difference in purchasing the same house based on where the house is standing, because maybe the one which is close to the road, which has a lot of air pollution, a lot of sound pollution, which obviously damages certain parts of your brain and so on. And so how would you know that, right? And or how do you measure how much energy is coming through the walls of your house in order to be able to produce carbon credits, right? Which maybe you would be able to sell. All of that is enabled through satellite imagery, and it's funny that you mention it, and I think that maybe is I think it's in Mission Impossible that Ethan Hunt has that thing which he puts on his throat and he can change the voice. So maybe the scientist needs this kind of AI kind of clip that they put on their throat. So the moment you speak the way how you would do it, and then the machine translates it into the normal consumer kind of language, so they understand, they get hooked up.
Tangible outputs, as we call them.
Exactly, I like that, tangible outcome. You touched a little bit about how you started Mona Lisa, and I think that's a really interesting venture. It's so brave to actually start your own magazine and your own publication. If you think about it, especially if you think where the internet era is and how everything runs so fast, what are some of the things which you felt that worked really well for you when you started the magazine? And is there anything which if anybody's thinking about the same kind of venture, what would you advise to them?
This is a good question. So I can tell you what didn't work. So for example, you really need a newsroom of people that they work with you on a stable basis. So the idea to me that you just have scientists writing for you, it doesn't really work, because scientists 90% of the time cannot write, and they don't have the time to write, and they don't like to write, they don't have the attention, because it's not their job. So it's a kind of like, if you want to have high quality outputs in terms of storytelling, you need to have people that can hit the storytelling right. Sometimes are scientists that did a kind of a path of journalism and communication. So those people existed. They are naturally interested. I'm one of them, I shifted, I transitioned because I always liked writing, etc. And some others are journalists doing the inverse path. They're coming from journalism and they're learning about science and space. So you want this type of key figures, for example. You want this type of figures, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere, because scientists are just too busy. They don't want another job, fundamentally. And sometimes they cannot have another job. Another thing that it works is to find your niche. Generic science magazine, they're quite difficult nowadays because everything is generic. So you really need to have huge influx of funds to build a platform that covers every type of science. You need to be National Geographic, you need to be Scientific American. These type of platforms can cover any type of science, but they come with heritage. They've been there for like centuries in the case of Scientific American. So if you want to start something new, something fresh, something small also and independent, maybe underground, start niche, small sector, verticalize, because otherwise too horizontal, you're gonna lose yourself. You're not gonna find enough audience. Which is why space is a great start. You just go space, vertical, and even more, space of space, geopolitics of space, economy of space, which is a sub-niche of already a niche. But that can allow you to find maybe not too many readers. But in the digital world, in the global world, sometimes you don't care because you can get readers everywhere.
Everywhere,
Maybe you're gonna have 2,000 subscribers. But if those 2,000 subscribers are like keen in carry on and you can maintain your little newsroom, your small enterprise, then 2,000 are enough. You don't need the 5 million, 20 million of the New York Times, for example. You have to start think small, but with a global approach. And another thing that I noticed, and I think this is one of the key things for me in everything I do, is that I think journalism and media and digitalization and AI, all this internet and AI, they've completely broken the journalistic approach because people are not willing to pay for the news, because you can find news everywhere, because the news are not validated anymore. So the idea of providing mere information as a business model, in my opinion, doesn't work. People don't care about information. You can literally open up Google, type in, and you will have AI getting you all the basic information of something for free. Stealing and data mining from other platforms, by the way. So this is also a ruin for media enterprises. They have to screen themselves because otherwise they get completely depleted. But if you offer intelligence, if you offer insights, if you offer analytical opinions, if you do the extra mile, you put together different opinions, you trace a line, you observe trends, and you pack them, then people will listen because that's still valuable, because that's still something that AI cannot do. That's something that Google cannot do. Putting together the right information, filter, voucher them, observe them, and provide you with an informed opinion that can help you to understand certain topics or certain movements, or can help you to extend your knowledge. That's still something that people find valuable. So personally, I don't put much effort into the fast news, the information, the technical, the details, because those are things that you can find everywhere. You can find them on Wikipedia. However, I do put information in collecting different opinions, observing trends, and giving an informed opinion and interpretation of the data. Intelligence.
It's fascinating what you mentioned that, right? Because we are bombarded every day with so much of data, and I think that the gift or the discipline of critical thinking and actually validating what is true, where did it come from, click on the links and actually see what the source of it is. I think that that's something we need to start to almost like ingrain into our own habits, like drinking water, right? Because we need it. And I think that that's, a really great point. It's so impressive. You are so well rounded, right? I mean, from scientist to former chief editor to co-founder of a magazine. Now you back into your academia with, because you are visiting professor at the AGH University of Science and Technology of Krakow as an expert of space geopolitical and space strategy. So you have like this big view of things. I'm really curious, what are you observing in the current space landscape that particularly excites you?
I am observing, well, at the moment we're having a very interesting geopolitical dimension, and space is at the center of it, in good or bad, for so many reasons. It's at the center of it because it's always been a military tool. It's at the center of it because militaries are interested, and it's at the center of it because certain key actors in the space sectors, they became political actors in the US. It's So it's difficult to ignore it. My rhythm of work has been also increased in the past few months because every day there is something new. It's also interesting because European-wise, we are now approaching a new phase of development in space, and we don't know which type of choice we'll make. And I think the geopolitical situation, which is not a status quo geopolitical situation anymore, will push Europe to make choices that maybe is not done in the past. And space is somehow a economical habilitator to move and change the equilibrium of the world in terms of powers. Now the classic power, the classic US-led world might change quite fast. We have China, of course, the new actor, but now we see also different dynamics. We see Canada, which is, I don't know what Canada will do now with this complete tension that there is with the US. We have in Brazil, we have in India, we have in Russia, we have in the Middle East UAE bloc, we in Japan, we have in Europe. So our space might redefine the global powers, and it might be able to do that. That's also something that is very, very interesting to observe. And then, of course, we're having the moon race, we're having Artemis, we're having the RLS. Again, similarly to the 60s, I'm observing this new moon race, and I'm wondering who is going to arrive first, the US or China? And I think it's a legitimate question, and we will see what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years.
I like the view you put on it because as we are busy as humans scrambling on Earth and firefighting with small things in a sense, right? There is, and I like how you elevated it. There is almost like a much bigger geopolitical situation starting to evolve around the universe, right? And out of Earth. It's I think it would be really interesting to observe it, as you said, over the next couple of years, what will happen, but also what many opportunities it will offer to industries on Earth, right? Because what I really like about the new space economy, that it's almost any job you do on Earth, you could do in that new space economy kind of environment, which is really fascinating. I want to go a little bit to your fellowship. So as a 2023 Karma Fellow, you are part of this incredible selected group of space leaders, which dedicate to foster trust and cooperation on global scale. How has that experience shaped your perspective on international collaboration in space?
Well, it was a fantastic experience, first of all. Let me tell you, Andrea was probably one of the best choices I made in the recent years. And it's quite understated, the Karman, compared to what they do, to the precious support and key networking that he creates. And of course, it's an opportunity that is there and you make the most the way you want it. Some people, maybe they don't use it much. I personally really enjoyed it first of all, because he allowed the creation of an intimate group of people with this idea that they take you away for a week. It seems strange, but it's properly bonding. It was also after a few years of COVID, so actually being able think, when you are a student and you do the student trips, exactly how much bonded and closer with your friends you come out after that. But those things don't happen anymore when you're an adult. It's not that you can take away 7 days from your family, from your work, from your obligations. It's really difficult. So doing it at an adult age and actually being put for 7 days in a completely different environment with 15 strangers and learning about each other and keeping space as a sort of like general theme and common denominator between all of us, it was extremely interesting. I got exposed to people that I would have never met otherwise. Some of them, they are now my collaborators, or I work with them in certain different projects. Some of them, they become friends. And it also allows a kind of dimension of open-minded dialogue and brainstorming that usually you don't get when you are just having a Zoom call. So putting together 15 people coming from so many different environments, confronting themselves on the big topics, the big problems in space, it was incredibly valuable. So I think it's an incredible experience. I really recommend it.
For people who don't understand how it works, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more? Now, after these kind of meetups, is there then a white paper published, or are there some recommendations which are being sent somewhere? So, because you, as you described, you put 15, incredibly smart, focused people together for 7 days. I am sure it's, the ideas and the exchange must have been spectacular. How does then the rest of the world or the organization benefit from these kind of meetups?
So the program, the membership is 1 year, so it actually lasts 1 year. The peak of this experience is the Caravan Week, but you have different meetings before, and each meeting is kind of like business oriented to allow you to explore different topics, to think outside the box, to come out with some interesting guidelines. So there is already a bit of training, and then every Caravan Week has a theme, and during this week, different topics attached to this theme are explored on so many different angles. And at the end of this week, there are recommendations on how to move forward, and everything is somehow respectful of your skills and your time. So nobody's going to ask you to write a paper about space policy if it's not your field. So out of all these topics and all this idea that comes out from the Space Week, then everyone is allowed to commit to some task, to push others. So in my case, for example, because I was doing podcasting, so I did all a series of podcasting about the Caravan Week, and I kept working and collaborating and giving exposure with the companies that I work with the Caravan Weeks, in this case, the Maldivian Space Research Organization. So, everyone can commit and try to push their ideas a bit further with the network.
I like it how it maximizes the abilities, the people, what kind of capabilities people brought in. Emma, you're so clearly passionate about STEM, and I'm sure we have a lot of, young listener. And I would like to understand, what advice would you give to the audience, and especially to women who are interested in pursuing careers in the space sectors? And where do you see the unique opportunity? Excuse me. Where do you see the unique opportunities for them?
Well, I mean, any tech sector has opportunities, not only space. I pursued the tech sectors for many years before turning to communicator. So the first obvious topic is don't get scared and to do it without feeling, because so many girls, they just step back because they're not good in math, they're not good in physics, and they don't know how many men are not good in math and good in physics, and they still do math and physics. So don't be scared about those difficulties and those challenges, because challenges when you're 20, they're there to help you, and you will be able to overcome them. This is something I learned about youth. They are able to overcome way more than they think. So the first, for the youngest generation, is that one, definitely, to don't be scared, don't be intimidated. And sometimes, yes, you will sit in a room where there are only students, male students, but still carry on and do your work. And there will be moments that are difficult, but don't give up before trying. For the women that are more advanced in their career, so they graduated, they are in the work environment. To me, one of the key problems that I still see in the space sector, but in any tech sector, is that there are not enough women leadership. There are not enough women that have the power, the decisional power to administrate money, to decide how the money should be spent, to decide who to hire, to decide the guidelines of the company. I often ask myself, is certain IT companies, certain social media companies, certain tech companies that are clearly led by men, if they were led by women, if certain mistakes that I've seen in the past years, they would have been made the same way. Because there's a huge problem of the lack of women representation at the highest level, at the decisional level. So my encouragement for those women that they are, be ahead in their career, is to take a lead, to take the lead and decide, if they feel it, to stop only putting effort and skills for the companies of somebody else, but to put all this effort and all the skills and all these abilities for their own technological baby, if you want to call it, their own corporate baby, their own business, because that pays a lot on the short term and on the long term.
It's so fascinating that you said that. I had a meeting before this recording with you, with a really brilliant mind, a gentleman who are, was giving me some advice on an AI venture which I'm building. And I left so excited, but I also left so scared because I was thinking, I don't even think like that, right? And I think it's the often for us as women, we operate, we are less risky, right? We don't take so many risks, and we always think, and I think I was telling him something and he said, no, you shouldn't think like this. You need to try it, and of course there will be rise, but the risk in this size is too minimal. Don't even think about it. You can't put yourself into that mindset. And I was thinking, wow, this was the first mindset I even had. And I think that the mindset change in terms of how we sometimes approach problem solving and how we approach our own ambitions and careers, I think needs to change and need to shift, right? And which brings me, to a question. You're doing so much, Emma. I mean, it's like, it's and I don't want to use the word balance because I don't think that balance even exists. It's like a juggling, right? So between all the different initiatives which you're doing, and obviously your personal life, your health, and everything around, how do you effectively manage all these different roles and decide when to focus on what to obviously bring the projects to success?
Well, I think one of the key thing is that I try to keep all my project going in the general direction. So I don't have project that they take me too much and too far out. All the projects somehow slowly contribute to the same pot, to the same direction, which is, the one that I visualize where I would like to be. And so even if maybe 2, 3 projects seem detached now, or they seem one is going in one direction, one is the other, I try to push them to have a common denominator so that I'm not really wasting energy. I'm just investing different type of energies in different moments. And sometimes, often some projects, they grow at different speed. So something might go faster and some might need more gestation time. So it's also not everything happens at the same time. And when it comes to my personal life, personal balance with, working is a passion that I have. I do enjoy to work. I have to admit it. So, but I do trace the line when it becomes an obsession, when it becomes a duty, when it becomes something that I don't enjoy it anymore. It becomes just a kind of something that I have to do, and something that I learned from my PhD years. I think when you're younger, you really tend to not be able to organize your time properly. You work on weekends, you work badly, you sleep too long. So those kind of thing that happens when you're 25. But now it's much more, I'm much more able to be efficient and effective. And this allows me to carve the time with my beloveds, with my family, with the people that I love, with my friends, because this is somehow the two things are so connected, Andrea. I think this is a very important feminine message to give, that if you deplete your cups too much because you keep working and working and working and working, then there is nothing else to give. There is no creativity to give. There is no that kind of spark of ideas that actually propels you and push you forward. I remember I had, a few years back, I was discussing with a famous space person, and he was only reading things about space, only books about space, only papers about space. Everything was about space, space, space. And I remember, I was reading, in my free time, I don't read about space. I read about something else. Why I do that? First, because I'm interested in other things, thanks God. I'm not obsessed. And I think that's a positive thing. And second, because sometimes cross-contamination with other fields are so completely different from us, can bring new, fresh ideas in our own field. Media, journalism. I don't use space media to learn about media, to learn the best way to do journalistic work. I use the New York Times, I use the New Yorker, I use the Economist, and they don't deal about space, because I learn different techniques and different things, and all this baggage of culture then can be pushed into our discipline. I think this cross-contamination is fundamental, otherwise everything becomes a bit sterile and we just keep discussing the same ideas among each other.
It's fascinating when you said that because in design thinking, where you go through ideation, there are a couple of methods, and one of the methods how you try to extract ideas out of your participants and people is where you ask them to say, look at movies and books and things in nature and what's happening there and how they solve certain challenges, and then look at how they solved it and see if you could use the same principle and apply it to the problem you have. And it's fascinating how often you would be able to say, oh, wow, this happens with animals, for example, and I could use the same kind of problem solving. I mean, it's exactly what you're describing. It's this openness to see solutions outside of that field. Before we close off, longevity today is such a big topic, right? Taking care about your physical health and your mental health, and obviously constantly growing your brain to keep up. What do you do? Do you meditate? What sports do you do? How do you find that, the other two aspects? How do you take care of it?
So first of all, I think this is very important to keep your balance. In order to keep your mind clean, you need to have something that allows you to release the energy to all that build up academic, intellectual things that you do with your brain and the stress, etc. I'm lazy. Andrea, I'm lazy. I'm a lazy person. However, I do swim. I have a swim team twice a week, all ladies.
Nice.
We do crossing of lakes, and it's been for years. And for me, it's just such a pleasure to meet the same friends every Monday, every Thursday, and just swim together. And it's fantastic. Swimming is great for your mind. And I try to, I arrive at 6 or 7 in the evening, and if I'm here, my husband and I, we just, put on some music, we cook together, we create the bonding that otherwise you get trashed with the modern life. And even just the process of cooking fresh food together, we have a chat, we discuss about movies or books, and that allow us to kind of build up also an intimate dimension that is important. Otherwise, we become two flatmates.
Yeah, two robots, right? You mentioned that you read obviously outside of space. So before you finish, do you have any recent book recommendations which you would share and recommend to our listeners as well?
So I recommend, this is a Polish actually writer. I have to see the title in English because I read it in Italian, of course. Her name, she's a Nobel Prize winner, by the way. And her name is Olga Tokarczuk. She's fantastic. And the recent book I read about her is called Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. And it's a fantastic book, and I warmly recommend it.
Okay, wonderful. I will definitely put it into the notes. Emma, it was an absolute inspiration speaking with you today. Your journey is such a testament of, that curiosity is such a superpower of yours, and I like how you had the quantum leaps in your careers. I'm really curious what is the next one because with your track record, I'm sure one at least is coming. And I really love your interdisciplinary thinking. I think that part between the different, from volcanologies to space to journalism, back to teaching, it's really inspiring. And so thank you so much for your insights and expertise which you shared with us today on Space Uncensored.
My pleasure, and thank you for inviting me, Andrea, and all the best. And I'm looking forward for the next time.
Thank you so much. This was Dr. Emma Gatti for you, dear listeners. To learn more about her work, you can find links in the profile in the podcast description. Thanks for listening to Space Uncensored, and please tune in to our next episode. Until then, do keep looking up and thinking big. Stay curious and keep pushing the boundaries because who knows where your journey will take you. See you soon.